So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We have given 2 minutes or so to have everyone join this webinar. I think we should start now. So, welcome to the webinar that is titled Building Climate Resilience in Arid and Semi-Arid Landscapes, Unlocking Fodder Value Chains for Livestock Production. A webinar that is being led here by Millennium Water Alliance, and with me are colleagues from Millennium Water Alliance, but more importantly, we have our CEO, that's our Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Keith Wright, who is here with us, who will give a few remarks or some opening remarks, and then we'll embark on starting off the webinar with very interesting presenters today. Over to you, Keith, to give a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Stivers, and good day, everyone. Thanks for taking time for this webinar. And mine's just to say welcome on behalf of the Millennium Water Alliance. We're a global alliance of NGO, business, tech, and research organizations working together on global water security issues. And we do that both by learning, doing, and advocating. And you're going to be hearing today about an important topic on the theme of resilience and climate resilience in our work in Kenya that we do in partnership with Swiss SDC and a number of our members. So we're looking forward to a good topic and some specifics around how we're advancing this and what we're learning. So thanks for making time, and Stivers, back to you.
Thank you, Keith. And I am Stivers Kathudi, the Country Director for Millennium Water Alliance. I'm based here in Nairobi, Kenya. As I said, we have a very interesting webinar today where we'll be discussing about fodder value chains, but more so in the context of arid lands in Kenya. And basically, these are lessons that we can take globally to other areas that are arid and semi-arid. So with us today is the main reason for today, and mainly the webinar flow, we'll listen to some presentations, but more so we want to hear about the state of fodder value chains in the arid and semi-arid lands. We'll also be talking about systems thinking and inclusive fodder production systems. We'll also be talking about financial solutions for fodder and livestock, small, micro enterprises. The objective of the webinar today is to disseminate key learnings or key findings from Rapid Plus, which is one of the programs that MWA leads in Kenya. A study or a fodder study that was conducted by this program is one of the key things that we're doing today, just to listen to some of the key findings that came from this. But also, we will also be discussing current trends, challenges, and emerging opportunities in the fodder value chains. We'll also look at strategies to strengthen local and regional fodder systems, scale up, commercialization, and also how to foster market-oriented fodder enterprises. With me are very interesting speakers today, and I'll introduce my speakers, but then and thereafter go through a few housekeeping rules. Our first speaker today will be Bolton. Bolton is a seasoned rangeland expert with extensive experience in rangeland management, range ecology, livestock production systems, GIS, remote sensing, and data science for conservation. He combines his strong academic background in rangeland management, climate research, and data science to advance community-based conservation through data-driven approaches. His work focuses on enhancing ecosystems' health and building resilient pastoral livelihoods across Kenya's drylands. He holds a bachelor degree in range management from the University of Nairobi and is a climate research scholar with the Eco-Science Generation Initiative. He's a member of the Grassland Society of Kenya. Currently, he serves as the Rangeland Intervention Coordinator for the Rapid Plus program that is led by Millennium Water Alliance. Our second speaker will be Abdikarim. And Abdikarim Dawood is a seasoned professional with strong background in managing and advising development projects. He has 18 years of experience in working with the private sector, NGOs, and government, with a keen focus on food systems, water, and climate change in the Horn of Africa. Currently, he serves as the Food Systems and Private Sector Development Advisor at the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, that's SDC, for the Horn of Africa. Our third speaker is Sarah. Sarah is an expert in agricultural finance and value chain development. She has over 20 years experience supporting farmers, micro, small, and medium enterprises, microfinance institutions, savings and credit cooperative organizations, and commercial institutions. Sarah has worked with public institutions, private sector, and international organizations, both as an employee but also as a consultant. And her other areas of expertise include strategic business planning, policy formulation, project management, mentorship, capacity building, resource mobilization, partnership management, and credit administration. She holds a master's degree in agriculture and applied economics from the University of Nairobi and is a fellow at the Africa Food Fellowship. Currently, she serves as a senior planning officer at the Agriculture Finance Corporation. You can see we have a very rich team of panelists, our three panelists for today, who will be speaking shortly. But before we go to the panel discussion, I would want us to go through a few housekeeping rules, whereby we want you to really share your own experiences and lessons regarding this topic. But also feel free to use the chat box to make comments, provide resource, or also share your experiences. Please share. You can also use the Q&A feature to ask questions. You can add questions at any time, and we will be looking at them and have our panelists respond to them later. We will make an effort to address all questions, either by the panelists speaking to them, but also we can have the panelists responding to them through the Q&A feature or the chat box. We will be recording this webinar, and we will share it after the webinar is over. But also, we have subtitles for those who are joining us and would like subtitles in Spanish. Please look out for that button, which you can click to change your language and speech. And then you can also show live captions so that you can be reading through them as we speak. So, at this point, I would want us to start off with the discussion for today. And our first speaker, Bolton Onyango, will be speaking to us through several issues, but more so, Bolton, I would request you to take us through over the current state of fodder value chains in the context of the Arid lands in Kenya, including the production, the aggregation, storage, and market dynamics that reveal what Rapid Plus really did in the fodder learning study that we had that we undertook. But also you can respond to and also expound on some of the key challenges facing fodder producers. Also, looking at the entire value chain and also in terms of inputs access, production constraints, post-harvest losses, poor infrastructure, limited market linkages, and systems bottleneck that hinder the commercialization of fodder value chain, of fodder production. So over to you, Bolton. I think you'll give us the presentation, and later we will go through questions for. Please, if you have questions for Bolton, please let us know, and you can write them on the chat box. So over to you, Bolton, to take us through your presentation.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Stivers. Well, I think it's imperative for us to understand why animal feeds and fodder matter in Kenya. And to begin with, livestock is central in Kenya's rural economy. The sector contributes 42% of the country's agricultural GDP, and that covers 12% of the national GDP. In arid and semi-arid areas, livestock is the mainstay, accounting for up to 95% of the household income. Nationally, Kenya supports over 73 million equivalent, which is equivalent to 24 million tropical livestock units, and that is according to the recent statistics by IGAD. But here's the catch, here's the challenge. There's a 46% national feed deficit, and that means Kenya is only able to meet just over half of its livestock feed requirements annually. The demand is further concentrated in the ASALs, which accounts for 73% of the national annual feed demand, compared to just 27% outside the non-ASAL areas. Well, even more important, it's good to let us know that 80% of Kenya's agricultural output is driven by smallholder farmers, many of whom are increasingly turning to fodder production as a resilience strategy. However, despite their growing role, their growing interests, these farmers continue to face persistent barriers. And just to mention a few, access to inputs, markets, and financing are some of the barriers that they face. So these figures really paint a clear picture of how fodder is not just a feed issue, it is a critical lever to ensure that pastoral livelihoods are resilient, but also we build food security for the country. Now, cognizant to this, Rapid Plus in the past 3 years has been actively been supporting fodder interventions as a pathway to building climate resilience in livelihoods in the ASALs. But from our field experiences, there are key challenges that we see persist. So some smallholder farmers are struggling to take much of their produce due to weak market systems and limited aggregation mechanisms. So this prompted Rapid Plus, the program, with support from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, to commission a fodder learning study at the tail end of last year, just to understand what is the current state of this fodder situation in northern Kenya. What are these bottlenecks? What are some of the opportunities that we can run with, so that we ensure that the enterprises are fully commercialized and scalable? Next slide. So last year, a research study was commissioned, and these were the major objectives for the study. First of all, it was key for us to identify and map out key actors along the value chain, but also clarify their roles and their relationships. Secondly, the study sought to evaluate the seasonality in fodder demand, seasonality in fodder availability, but also what are the market dynamics that the farmers experience in these ASAL counties. And finally, it was to identify or try to pick out systemic and operational challenges across the value chains, all the way from production to consumption, and identify opportunities for targeted interventions. And so to your right is the scope of the study, covering 5 counties, which is the Rapid Plus, where the Rapid Plus program is. Next slide. Yeah, I won't go into this, but this is the methodology. But it is important to note that we did some purposive sampling, so picking out input suppliers, fodder producers, aggregators, basically all the actors along the fodder value chain. Next slide. Well, I think it's good for me to begin even before the stage of producing fodder. And interestingly, from the fodder learning study, it was revealed that 6% of fodder producers solely rely on development organizations and NGOs to give them farm inputs, while 23% get theirs from agrovets. And this is mainly forage seeds. So what stood out more is that 9% of the respondents mentioned that development organizations were the reason why they ventured into fodder production in the first place. So meaning they also help them introduce, in the development organizations introduced them to good agronomic practices earlier on, which benefited them in low production costs initially. So essentially, NGOs and agrovets are playing a key role in bridging access to certified seeds, access to extension services, and the like. But we all know that is not sustainable. This over-reliance on donor support for farm inputs, for example, and technical advisory services is detrimental, so much so that many fodder producers no longer associate the capital costs of fodder production as their own responsibility. And that is huge. Now, in terms of fodder production, at the production stage, we see 65% of the producers producing fodder for both subsistence and commercial use. Now, it's important to note that for those who are producing for subsistence, it is primarily for use in sustaining their milking herds, while the large satellite herds are highly dependent on natural pastures. There's an even split between those who are producing for subsistence and commercial purpose. Next slide. Now, at the aggregation stage, this segment of the fodder value chain is not well developed. Currently, we are seeing individual buyers, such as agrovets, for example, and independent fodder traders sourcing directly from fodder farms. Typically, the aggregation ranges between 300 to 1,000 bales, but it's important to be cognizant that there's a notable shift that is emerging with the establishment of aggregation centers linked to livestock markets, which have a higher capacity ranging from 1,000 to 2,000 bales annually. So then, but fodder aggregation again is largely seasonal and opportunistic. And so this makes it vulnerable to inefficiencies through post-harvest losses. Some actors often play multiple roles within the value chain. For example, we are seeing some producers who play as an aggregator, especially during the dry season, just to capitalize on increasing demand by collecting bales from other neighboring farms and selling through local markets or aggregation points. But the same farmers or the same producers do have poor aggregation practices. Their storage facilities are not to standard, and therefore most of the fodder produce is lost through post-harvest losses. Now, in terms of conservation techniques, most fodder producers prefer to dry and bale, and this is largely because it requires less specialized handling compared to silaging, which involves more of technical expertise and infrastructure. We are seeing some upcoming trends where milling and pelleting is the order of the day and is gaining popularity due to its high demand, especially during the dry season. And these value-added products are viewed as cost-effective, and they offer better nutritional value per kilogram. Next slide. This is where the gist of the fodder value chains in the ASALs is. Now, from the fodder learning study, it is clear that the annual fodder demand across the targeted counties for this case is estimated at around 145,320 metric tons. And the growing demand is largely driven by persistent drought cycles, leading to reduced availability of natural pastures. But then again, the rise of peri-urban settlements means that the pastoralists and the communities are adopting and intensive livestock production systems. Now, there's more interest in commercialization of livestock products such as milk and meat. Recently, camel milk is most preferred in the ASALs. In contrast, the actual fodder supply stands just at 24,500 metric tons, reflecting a huge supply gap. And this shortfall is largely attributed to seasonal fluctuations due to heavy reliance on rainfall for production of fodder. Sometimes limited mechanization is a hindrance for producing to meet the demands. And of course, a key aspect to this conversation is the seasonality in fodder and demand, fodder demand and supply. So in terms of fodder availability, to your right, it's a graph trying to depict how seasonality in fodder vis-a-vis demand, vis-a-vis prices interact in these ASAL counties. So fodder availability typically peaks immediately after long rains, that is between May to August. And then when pastures, that is when pastures are cultivated and are most most abundant. But availability begins to decline as the dry season sets in. Conversely, demand begins to rise on the onset of the dry season, particularly between January to March, as natural pastures start to diminish. Therefore, meaning that in order to capitalize on high prices during the dry season, storage is key. So, and we can all conclude that fodder business is actually it's a storage business. And this is reflected by the statistics that 51% of the fodder producers prefer to store their forage just to capitalize on the high prices during the dry season. Next slide. Yeah, so how does seasonality reflect in the business cases? These are two business cases from two different, but quite huge figures, but I would like to draw your attention to how the differences between net revenue, revenue between normal season and dry season compare between the two business cases. And indeed, we can clearly say that a fodder business is a storage business. And if there's no adequate infrastructure to allow that, then we are not in business. Next slide. Well, much has been said. So just to summarize, what are these major bottlenecks that occur within the value chain nodes? In terms of structural or systemic barriers, we are seeing that fodder systems in the ASAL being fragmented and informal. Market organization sometimes is weak, and technical knowledge among the producers is inconsistent. And there's usually a heavy reliance on short-term donor-funded projects. Even more so, there's lack of coordination between government agencies, donor agencies, development partners, and this also limits how effective the interventions can be. In terms of infrastructure, it's largely lacking, especially when you're talking about having systems that are heavily reliant on rainfall. And so other mechanizations, such as baling, for example, is done manually. You know, storage facilities is also key and huge, and most affecting the farmers. So what about weak institutions? So many local cooperatives and producers struggle with governance. We are actually seeing examples where communities, because fodder production is being done under community land, some members tend to jeopardize the efforts of others, and so rendering their efforts futile in the long run. And so at the same time, you have the fodder cooperatives not well versed in business management. Sometimes most of the transactions are done through cash and no records are kept. In terms of limited access to finance, we all agree that fodder producers face significant challenges in accessing affordable credit and insurance products, specifically tailored to these contexts of personal contexts. And this makes it difficult for them to move towards mechanization and eventually scaling up. And women and youth are particularly excluded from such benefits. And finally, there's policy inconsistencies, and fodder is often overlooked, and we are seeing regulatory gaps and unclear land tenure arrangements, especially in the pastoral landscapes. In other scenarios, you'll have county governments having overlapping departments. For example, you can have a department in livestock and another one in environment and natural resources. And both seem to work on the same landscapes, same initiatives, so it becomes difficult to even pull resources towards a targeted intervention. Well, that's it on my end. I'll welcome questions in the chat box. I'll be happy to give feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolton. Yes, thank you. And yeah, very interesting presentation from Bolton. I think the study really brings out many issues. And actually, that's why we want to engage with you more, our listeners and also participants today. The QR code that you see on your screen now is a QR code that you could scan and get to be part of this conversation. And it has a question in there on menti.com that is asking what you think is the biggest barrier to sustainable fodder production in arid and semi-arid lands. We will keep this for 1 or 2 minutes on the screen so that you can scan it and really give your thoughts about this. And we will be sharing the poll results or what you're saying from this question at the closeout session after the panel discussion. So this will remain on screen for 1 or 2 minutes now as you scan, and hope you can get to participate. I really encourage you to really share your experiences. And thank you for those who are also sharing their names and where they work in the chat box. That's also interesting for us to know. Now, as we transition from Bolton's presentation, I think Bolton brings out very key issues. One being, I think he's made a very interesting phrase of fodder is a storage business, but also he's told us that 36% of farm inputs are provided by NGOs. Really interesting that the people who are participated in this study shows that 36% of them, talked about inputs coming from NGOs, but also 39% of the fodder producers made the decision to venture into fodder production, basically by the influence of NGOs against or versus the 21% who talked about market-driven orientation. They're in the business because of market forces or market basically driven orientation. I think this sets up a very good discussion as for our next speaker, Abdikarim, who I think it is clear now that systemic barriers need systemic solutions, Abdikarim. This brings us to perfectly to think through how we should be addressing the systemic issues in this, and also bringing your experience from working with the private sector, NGO, and government, and focusing on food systems. You could walk us through how we can move from project-based models to system-enabling approaches that unlock private investment, but also build demand, elevate local ownership, and including the vital roles of women and youth in all this. So, Abdikarim, maybe to start us off, you can tell us what are your thoughts on transitioning from project-based fodder interventions to systemic enabling approaches. Over to you, Abdikarim.
Thank you very much, Stivers and the team for having me and for this question. To start with, I think there are a couple of things. One is to understand the current status and scenario of fodder production and fodder system in the ASALs. And this largely was painted by Bolton in his presentation, and also the results we have seen in the assessment that was recently conducted. If you broadly look at this assessment, and you also observe what is happening in North and Northeastern Kenya when it comes to fodder production, a number of things come to perspective. The first thing is this is a space, as was described earlier, is highly fragmented. It is more a supply production driven approach of engagement. It is largely led by NGOs and donors. So we are actually in this space a culprit. Largely demand is during drought seasons. And even then, it's not well structured. If you look at the statistics, for example, which was given by Bolton, when you look at 36% relying for their inputs on NGOs, more than that, because if you read the study, you will also see actually 60% get free inputs and services from time to time. The other, apart from the 36, these other inputs also come from government, both national and counties. And therefore, I think that system is very fragmented. It is slightly not able to sustain itself on a very long term. And to scale such a system becomes much, much problematic. And I think what we need then to ask is, as you said, what do we need to do to shift these gears from this sort of production system to a more system enabling approach? And why are we talking of system enabling approach is because most donors, NGOs, I think it's good to understand that we are not leading, we are not supposed to be leading the system. We are supposed to be enabling the system and removing what Bolton referred to as systemic constraints. So this is very important. And to do so, there are a couple of things, largely three things, to shift the gears from this sort of production to a more systemic level. One is to enable demand-driven fodder production system, or fodder system, let me say. So from production to its storage to its consumption, all that has to be geared towards a certain, not perceived demand, but actual demand. And here I'll pause to ask, for those of you who have engaged in this space, who actually consumes fodder? If you categorize the market, I'm here in the capacity of someone who is working in the development sector, but I'm also a pastoralist. So the thing is, those guys out there roaming with their animals from point A to point B, do they actually consume bales of fodder? This fodder you see going into the market, do they actually consume? And if the answer is no, which is largely no, why? So those are some of the questions then we need to ask. And for those who are consuming, who are largely around villages and towns and centers, herds for milking and so on, why is it that this is not sustained even when drought happens? And you will hear probably at some point we will be discussing issues of fluctuation of markets when you look at what Bolton was presenting. So three things. One, we have to create demand. Two, the system has to be led by private sector. And three, the system has to be enabled by government. Enabled by government from infrastructure perspective, such as storages that they can give to cooperatives, they can give to communities, water, electricity connection, cold chain facilities, and so on. Private sector led has to be from the production through to market all the way to the consumption. This has to be their journey. And they have to come up with models that then work. A good example in the study is in 2022, there was an aggregator in Wajir, if you look at the study assessment report, who came up with a model of actually aggregating fodder just before the drought. However, at the point of his sale, it was quickly disrupted by, again, free distribution of fodder at the point when drought happened. And so his distribution would have been probably sufficient without any donor or any support, but that was also collapsed as a result of what then happened in terms of free distributions. Thank you, Stevas.
Yes, thank you, Abdikarim, for that very conclusive and response. But I think you touched also largely on how to de-risk some of these local investments. Maybe you can also speak around how can we de-risk local and private investment in fodder value chains and then stimulate that market through market development. I think you've spoken partially around this, but maybe you can speak a minute or two on around de-risking of local private investment.
Thank you. Just before I talk of de-risking, maybe just to give one example of an intervention of shifting from project-based to systems-based. And I think this happens in many cases. It is where that entrepreneur has tried to go into, which is producer, aggregator, trader model. I think that should be an intervention model, which probably would help things to be shifted from project-based to more system. Then we would be able to understand what are the roles of these aggregators? What do they need? Because they are the ones who understand the market, and they largely understand the demand side of what this equation is looking like, and therefore give an avenue for the producer. So that could be one example of shifting this. Coming to your question of de-risking. De-risking, why are we even talking of de-risking here? Because we said it's supposed to be led by private sector. Largely here we are talking of SMEs. I saw someone from in the chat from SolarGen, for example. I'm just taking it as an example. So as an SME, as an enterprise out there in this value chain, de-risking them could be one of the instruments that we use as development partners, instead of then providing these inputs and services and things on their behalf, not for long, and then when our projects end, it then collapses. The risking is essential. It's very essential from an instrument perspective, because the area we are dealing with, the geography we're dealing with, is a very thin, fragmented market, riddled with operational challenges, riddled with a lot of other business challenges that you cannot go to the last mile easily. So for businesses, especially for SMEs, these are very critical areas. So we need to slightly de-risk probably their operations, their finances, risks of price volatility, risk of no offtake, risk of government shifts or so on and so. So there are a number of things that then we need to do. That's why we need to first of all de-risk. And to de-risk, therefore, some of the things we are talking of is, and largely comes up, is finance, access to finance. Access to finance, in most of those areas, you would have either commercial banks or MFIs or some sort of financial institutions that come in. SMEs and the development actors have to develop products that are able to reach to the farmers and the SMEs in the value chain, which then will not substitute also other actors like the MFIs, the financial institutions that play, for example, when we are doing the risking of finances. So we have to piggyback on them. Now, you could use instruments like blended finance, and these are things that are happening across the country. For those of you, for example, who know, in the agricultural sector, there is Acheli Africa, for example, which does a number of things in the other agricultural value chains as a blended finance interlocutor. So donor money through the NGOs can create blended financing with, let's just say, one of the commercial banks to create an avenue to support an SME to provide these services. A good example within the program we are talking about right now is PayGo Solutions. So if you have a PayGo solution service provider, then you stay behind them, provide on their behalf some sort of blended financing with them, but the SMEs then provide technical assistance, let's say, to the farmers, and that can be supported through the SME structure without really directly associating, for example, with the farmers from the programs that we have. So I would say interventions exist. An example I've given is just that one of blended finance. Technical assistance support can be given. Governments can also come in to provide de-risking, and de-risking from the government perspective can be infrastructure support. Bolton mentioned, for example, for a business is a storage business. Hubs within the communities can be created to form bulking of this fodder using sheds and infrastructure that belongs to the government, but then given to cooperatives and to communities within this sort of arrangement. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Abdikarim, and again, a very exhaustive and conclusive answer. I think you raised very many points there, but also before you go, I really wanted to ask one more question around the inclusive participation of women and youth. I think it's really a big issue, especially in the arid and semi-arid lands, where we have the women and the youth at times participating, but also at times not getting involved in some of these activities. So how do you ensure inclusive participation of women and youth in fodder-related enterprises? Maybe you spend 1 or 2 minutes maximum so that we move because of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bolton, in his presentation, again mentioned, and I quote him, he says, women and youth are largely excluded. I think inclusivity in such a value chain should be very intentional at the design of programs that aim to then create system shifts. I want to give, for example, if you read the assessment report, it says 54% of the producers are women, yet only 17% own land. So 54% are producers, 17% own land. If you also look at the youth, they largely give their labor to this production of fodder, but only 10% of the youth are involved beyond aggregation, which means they are not involved in the tail end of the value chain that can give them also decent jobs and returns, which then can come out of this. So I would say that is a huge gap if we need to then kickstart this sort of inclusive agenda. And I think some of the things we can do is to ensure that inclusivity happens is more group investments. So cooperatives or youth groups or women groups that then give, for example, ownership to a certain asset much more easier. The blended finance support, and this I can also give in terms of impact link financing models, for example, that happen across many value chains. These can be impact indicators, which then are given to either financial service providers or SMEs that then reach out to many women, many youth, create more jobs. And our financing, so donor financing, can then back such a level of impact, social impact indicators, instead of then saying, okay, you go ahead. So if I was to give the example of PayGo solution, and the program is supposed to be working with PayGo solution service provider, if we are giving subsidy or even de-risking finance to them, then they need to hit some of these, let's say, indicators of women inclusion, of more jobs for youth, or this kind of asset ownership by women and so on. So this then brings the gap of inclusivity much more less and limits exclusion. Right? Thank you.
Thank you, Abdikarim, again. Good. Thank you so much for those very insightful comments. I think we'll get a chance to also respond to some of the questions that will come through, especially which will be directed to you. But I think moving forward, I think you've talked about financing a lot, but also to sustain further commercialization in the ASRALs, I think financing is one paramount thing that Abdikarim is highlighting here. Our final speaker is Sarah Washeke, and she will help us to unpack some of the financial dimensions to value chains in the fodder production. Sarah, thank you for being here. We really appreciate your presence. Maybe you could start by walking us through the financial models that can support fodder SMEs and how they can be tailored to pastoralist context. I think Abdikarim has also mentioned a few things like impact link financing, blended financing. I think these are terms that you can also help us to unpack and understand more. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Teva, for that question. There are several financing models that can be used in our renews, but I'm going to stick to three. I don't want to talk, in the interest of time, I'm just going to stick to three. And the ones that I want us to look at, we have what we call direct lending. And in direct lending model, that's where the funding is given direct to individuals. Individuals who are not organized in any way. And it comes with its requirements. And these requirements are different for different financial institutions. But mostly you find that direct lending applies for individuals who are able to meet most of the requirement, and especially the collateral aspect that hinders most of the farmers or players in getting that. The second one is what we call anchor model. And under anchor model, what happens, and that I think would really be applicable in the ASA region, we find that we have these players who are really, really low, and they're not able to raise most of the requirement of the financial institution. Then what happens? We have one player who is large. Like in this context, when you're talking about fodder, then we find that there's one player who is able to get the fodder, has access to the market, then this is the person who financing is given to, and he or she is able to support the small farmers, fodder farmers that are working under him. Then this person you find is able to give them maybe working capital inputs in more friendly terms. The third and final model that I want us to talk about is what is called wholesale lending. And the wholesale lending, then what happens, financial institutions give money to either SACCOs, cooperatives, or microfinance institutions. And these microfinance institutions and SACCOs, because they have a relationship with the people on the ground, then they become the ones who are able to give these loans to the people. The fodder farmers. This one, the fodder farmers will have to be joined, or they'll have to be members of this institution. And this is a good model that can work for them, because then they are able to get very little amount of money that they need at a very reasonable terms. And then the beauty of them already belonging to a cooperative or a SACCO or a SACCO is that the challenges that they face to do with marketing, then that one is addressed, because cooperatives and SACCOs are able to go and get the market for them. When you talk about MFI institutions, again, this is a good model, because once they are able to get financing from that one, then they also benefit from technical support, issues to do with financial literacies, issues to do with record keeping. Then you find that they are able to be supported, and they'll be able to even be advised these challenges that they have with producing, which is the best model, how best can they be able to do their fodder to be able to get high returns. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And whenever we talk about financing, I think risk management pops up in conversation. So maybe you could also speak to us about elaborate risk management strategies that you think are relevant to fodder producers and livestock value chain actors.
Yeah, you cannot be able to talk about finance and separate it from risk, because they are twins. Because we have financial institutions on one side, they are looking at how best can we be able to get most returns. And then we have the fodder producers, who we are looking at them in terms of risky. Agriculture is always classified as a very high risk venture, but that is not to say that we should be able to shy away from it, because especially in this context, we've all been taken through by Bolton, the importance of the livestock sector. And so both to the general agricultural economy and also to the country's GDP, the contributions that it does is one that cannot be ignored. So there are various risks that face this. And for us to be able to address these risks, we're going to ask ourselves, why is this segment a risky segment? When you talk about fodder production, you cannot be able to talk about fodder without looking at the consumers of this fodder, who are the livestock farmers. And these livestock farmers in this area, you're looking at them and you are appreciating first the nature. You know, there's the culture aspect of the people in the Asa regions. We have the nomad nature of them, that they have to keep moving. So when you are talking about development of the fodder, and you're talking about these people who today they are here and tomorrow they're in another region, then you need to ask yourself, at what time are they going to really consume this food? And are they aware? So one way that you can be able to address that risk is, I think it's good to encourage the farmers in this area. They will not be able to go fully into feedlot, where the livestock are going to be enclosed, because that is not their nature, but probably talk about making it semi, so that when they go, then at times they can be able to come back. That way they're going to create a market for it. And that addresses that market risk, because as a financier, I will not be comfortable advancing loan to a fodder producer without knowing what is the final market that this fodder is going to reach to. So that is one. Another thing that has been highlighted is insurance. You know, we are living in the days of climate change, and the effects are now real. So I think it is good to encourage these people to be able to take insurance. I know insurance premiums have been classified to be quite pricey, but over the time, and with a lot of people embracing insurance, we have seen certain insurance companies coming down to subsidize the rates. The government is also involved. Development partners are also involved, just to bring down the insurance premiums. And another good way that is working, we have what we are calling the risk sharing facility. Abdika talked about it. And this risk sharing facility is being accepted by several, or being administered in several ways. We have what the development institutions are offering. We have the Africa Credit Guarantee Fund. We have the likes of the ASEDIS, And also we have one that is now formed by the government, which is the Credit Guarantee Scheme, and currently transitioning to the Credit Guarantee Company. Now, these people have to be organized in such a way that they tap into that. For me, the Credit Guarantee Scheme or the risk sharing facility is the best for this region. Best in the sense that it's going to subsidize or to entice all financial institutions to be able to advance funding to this institution, because then the financial institutions are going to offer credit to the fodder farmers, and then in return, the risk sharing facility can come and compensate them for that risk. So they are able to tap into that. But now the financial institutions have to work with these farmers. Another important way that we can be able to address the risk areas, and we've talked about these people not accessing financing. The product, again, Abdul talked about it. The product that we're offering to these fodder farmers, are they tailor-made to suit them? Because many are the times that we see financial institutions just giving a one-shoe-fit-all for the fodder farmers. We have to appreciate that this is a different category, and they have to develop products that are suitable for them. So partnership would also be key, where we have the fodder farmers, meetings with the fodder farmers, the financial institutions, the development partners, and even the private sector. I agree that we cannot leave private sector in it. And let's look at what are exactly the challenges that are facing these people. Are they the ones that we're addressing? Just to mention a few, I think that would help.
Thank you, Sarah. I think those are very also exhaustive responses there. I think finally we would also want to hear from you on your thoughts around overcoming the financial barriers in the ASALs. I think as you broke down from the direct funding, the anchor models, I think you could speak more of how then do we overcome this financial barrier for arid and semi-arid lands.
Thank you. How we overcome the barriers in this arid land is just a shift in the way that we do things. We just have to appreciate that we are dealing with a different segment, and we have to give them what is best for them. And when we talk about like the product that we're giving to these people, what type of collateral are you asking them? If you're asking them that they have to give the title deed as collateral, then it takes us back to the issue of financial exclusion. How many people in this area are able to give title deed as collateral? Because we have the issue of, one, do they have the collateral? And number two, are they willing to do that? And the moment you say that is the collateral that you're going to do, you automatically exclude the women and the youth. So you really have to see how do we make sure that we give them favorable terms, including the collateral, to ensure that we are able to get women and youth on board. And like for women and youth, you can be able to get them products that do not require that. The youth, they're mostly happy when they're dealing with digital. So if you're able to advance product to them digitally, then that helps in being able to help them to come on board. Another thing that you have to do, you must be able to link these people to the market. Ensure that the product that they have are able to get to the market. And the way they are producing, you should be able to give them products that are supposed to help them mechanize in producing. Maybe they have to make the pellet. Do they have the right equipment? Do they have the right storage facilities? And even to be able to reduce the post-harvest losses that came up in the study. You see, these post-harvest losses, if they have to be addressed, then you have to look at how are they handling this product. From the time they harvest it, are they able to capture, to process it with the right machineries in the right time, to be able to make sure that it retains the correct nutrients and continues. So I think those are some of the things. And again, partnership. We cannot work in isolation. And while I appreciate the development partners, they are doing a very good job. But I think as they develop these projects and the programs that have really developed the area, they should always have a very clear exit strategy so that we do not have these fodder farmers getting into fodder production just because there's a project. But what about ensuring that even before they come to that, let them be offered a lot of technical support, a lot of mentorship, so that as they started, they know it is not something that they are in need for the life of the project, but it already makes business sense for them. And that way they are willing to continue even beyond the life of the project. I think that would help.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think those responses from Sarah, but also the presentation from Abdikarim and Bolton, really raise important issues around the fodder value chain. I think we could move to a Q&A session as we wait. I'm trying to get through to the questions that have been asked on the chats. Sarah, let me just check if there's anything for you before you go off screen. I think most of these are comments which have been raised. I think Abdinasir Elmi, yes, that's the name, Elmi, I think, raising a good point around Abdikarim's points on what government and other organizations do. The point raised by Abdikarim, where distribution of free fodder by government during drought emergency periods could be mitigated if government and other actors could leverage on existing fodder farmers to become last-mile fodder suppliers to communities during such emergencies instead of them providing the free fodder. This will be a win-win both for all the actors, the government, other actors who fund the support, the fodder farmers as suppliers, and the pastoralists as beneficiaries. I think, Elmi, I think this is a very important point. I don't know if Abdikarim, you have an immediate reaction to Elmi's point, or do you support this?
Very, very important reaction by Elmi there. I think I concur with that. I mean, the idea here is that when you look at price volatility based on the assessment which was conducted, it ranges from 700 during off-peak to 2,000 per bale during drought seasons, for example. So if you go to the hay stores in different parts of the counties, they will tell you, we will wait for drought. Even when there was probably signs of drought and they can start continuing selling, they will still have to wait because they will know that, for example, government will come in, buy and give it out. And in some cases, that does not happen. What happens is then government gets pellets, for example, from many other areas in the country. And what then gets distributed are more pellets because they can be taken to many other parts of these counties very easily. And therefore, what happened to the farmers who are, let's say, hoarding or waiting until the government then comes to buy from them? They go into distress sell, or even they don't sell, and then the cycle continues and continues. So I think there has to be, as Sarah said, proper smart partnerships that comes out way before drought triggers. Proper planning has to be taken into shape where government subsidies come in. They know, for example, the stock of feed in every of the counties, and that county then can say, okay, this feed is of a priority, but they have to be dispensed before animals get to die. If you wait until the animals get to die, then you are distributing fodder again. It doesn't make any, for example, support or help. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdikarim. I think there's a comment here from Oma Otieno, who is talking about investment in the fodder value chain should be targeting existing private sector players or actors. They should then be linked to business development service providers, I think financial institution. I think this is an interesting question, Sarah, where we are talking about BDS, business development services, and how some of the ones who have shown initiative or started off on fodder production or even anything around the fodder value chain should be linked to get the support that they need to even become bankable or access to financial facilities. I don't know, what would be your immediate thoughts, Sarah, around this approach of support on BDS?
Absolutely. And I think that becomes the point of hardship between development partners and the private sector or the government. Because when the development institutions come in and start this project and they introduce them to the project and the farmers already adopt the practice, then with the support, and I initially talked about technical support and mentorship, then this becomes a point where you sort of handhold the fodder farmers and help them to do it at scale. Because when you're starting at a project, it's just at very basic scale. But when you help them to upscale it, then you can also link them to the market. In that way, they are able to make more profit, more money, and it's able to outlive between that. I think most of the challenge that comes here is I have been involved in some project in Marsabit in this area at some point, and it was sad to see the heavy investment that had been made. Project was started, and it was largely addressing these farmers. But after the project exited, then you just find heavy investment of institutions that are not doing anything. So for those institutions, what we need to do is just go back to those farmers, help them to be able to look at it as a business and be able to advance it further, because maybe the support they had was just enough to make them do at that small level. But now you come in to help them. How are they even able to develop a business plan that they can use to be able to access funding from commercial financial institutions? And that way you've already again helped them to look at it as a business, and you have all the players laid together. Like once they produce, at what is the best time for them to produce, so that they are not having this produce at a time when there's no drought. Because the idea is make sure that you match the production to ensure that the harvest comes at a time that it is required, sort of you create demand. And then when there's that demand, you already have people who are waiting to buy. Another way could be, what about if you're able to link them to contract farming, where you already have people on this side you are waiting to buy. That way, even as they're producing, they already know the market. So mentorship and supporting them with these things becomes really key. And I think this is something that should be adopted to support this area.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Dr. Karim. I'm not sure if there's another question that I might have missed on the chat, or anyone raising their hands. But maybe, is there any? Yes, Emmanuel. Lela, you can unmute and ask your question. Is Emmanuel ready to ask the question?
Yes. Hi, Stivers.
Hi, Emmanuel. Yes.
Yes, I hope you can hear me. My name is Emmanuel Lela, and I just wanted to have a follow-up question with regards to Bolton's presentation. And this is a very specific question that probably Abdikarim has just touched a little bit about it from the institutional from a systems perspective, which touches on institutions and governance. And so my question to Bolton is in two parts. Based on the findings of the fodder study, what specific policies or governance and institutional gaps limit commercialization of fodder in the ASALs, and how can we address some of these gaps? I know you've touched a little bit of this, but I kindly delve a little bit more into that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Emmanuel. Over to you, Bolton.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for the question. Well, I must be honest with everyone. Currently, there is no dedicated national or county level policy that treats fodder as a strategic commodity. So then this means that fodder is usually lumped under broader livestock or agricultural policies, and this often dilutes efforts to even budget for fodder value chains. And so if there's any policy that should be the first is to treat fodder as a commodity. And a good example is there are so many regulation policies for other commodities, but if you look at fodder, it's rarely regulated, and the markets are usually not well structured. So if we have to talk about commercializing, indeed, policy is key. In terms of institutional gaps that we are seeing, I must admit, weak coordination is really huge, and you can already see that county departments, governments, and some regulatory bodies are not well synergized, and this limits the delivery of cohesive support to broader services of fodder production. In terms of infrastructure, this is really huge, and since we have talked about fodder being a storage business, and the fact that some of these fodder farms are usually in those remote areas, access roads is something that is very key for fodder producers to be able to access markets. Remember, this also is reflected in the final prices or the market prices of fodder. And so for the government agencies and the county governments that are here, please, infrastructure is really, really huge in supporting that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolton. I agree. Yeah, there's a lot. It's really a package in terms of looking at policy, governance, and institutions. It's really a package of many things that need to be addressed. I think there's a question that has popped up before I ask if there's any other reaction from the other two panelists. But George Ralak is asking, is it possible that the nomadic nature of pastoralists is a potential hurdle for the market? I think he's talking about everyone is on the move. I think Abdikarim pointed to this. One being the large quantities of livestock with respect to the perceived fodder production. Second is the simple fact that there is constant movement of pastoralists. So basically people are on the move. Could this boil down to a conversation of mindset, culture, behavior change if the market is to be secured or grown? I think both Sarah and Abdikarim could give their comments. Maybe we start with Sarah, who's nodding her head.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I agree that the nomadic nature is a barrier, but we cannot change people from the way they work. That is their culture. So the best way that we can be able to do is work around it and see how do we take advantage of that nature when they are moving and when they are back to ensure that they are able to get that. Number one, we appreciate that the number of livestock or animals that you're talking about are really huge. So it is important for them to move at some time. But we also appreciate that these people do not move at every time. Because like even when the government was giving, somebody already talked about the government that has been supporting. And yes, we see the government coming in to support and giving feeds during this drought. It is already known that during this specific time, there's enough pasture in the area, or there's good rainfall to be able to develop to grow the fodder. And then during maybe say this other period or season, then this drought. So how do we ensure that we take advantage of that? We grow as enough fodder as possible. We make whether it's going to be silage, whether it's going to be hay, and then we store it. And then during this drought, we also help these people. I think how we are going to work with the culture and the nomadic nature is let these people also be encouraged and be shown it is okay. Your culture agrees or allows you to move with your animals and it is good. But it is also important for you to set apart some space and slowly enclose your animals so that they don't die. So during this time that they are encouraged to do, and that's why I talked about semi-feedlot, because you see, because we are not saying we change them completely from their culture. Then if they agree, and this is something that is going to take time, slowly you talk about them until they shift their mind, because we all agree it is very different to change our way of doing things. Then when they already agree and they have those feedlots already done, then during that time, it can be easy for us to be able to distribute the food to them. And again, it creates the first market for this fodder that is being produced. It's consumed in that market before we already start looking outside. So for me, I think that is how I look at it. Not a bad thing completely, not a good thing. It's about how do we work with it to ensure that we win. That's how I would look at it. And anyways, it's a good thing. It would call for partnership, and those are decisions that cannot be made by one partner. We have to sit down, the government, the locals, the financial institutions, the development partners, and look at what are the challenges that are coming with this nature, the nomadic nature. How do we ensure that we address it without the locals feeling that we are changing their way of life and stripping them the cultures that they dearly hold on to? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Abdikarim, I think also we've heard about the large quantities of livestock vis-a-vis the fodder production. I know Bolton talked about and showed us a nice graph showing the big gap. So anyway, are we trying to change their mindset and behavior?
I think, thank you very much, Stivers. Very good point from George on this discussion. This is a huge topic of discussion. But I want to say, first of all, the issue of large size herd in these areas, I think over a period of time, centuries, things have been like this: boom and bust. Animals will grow at some point and then drought will come. The size largely remains almost the same. Over years, the population of cattle has decreased in those areas. For example, camel population has increased, which is okay because of the hard nature of the thing. But I would say, okay, with all that, I think what is happening is urbanization also taking shape If you look at those counties, I grew up in one of those counties. I grew up in Wajir. If you look at how it was and today how it is, it's different. I mean, population is increasing, urban centers are increasing, mobility is reducing, which means then things are also changing. If they had mobility, people used to take 3 days, 4 days to go to a water point. Today, it's not the same. You have every 10-kilometer radius a water point where you migrate along and put things. I was asking myself, if pastoralists are on the move, why is it that businesses are not on the move? So why can't we not have business models on the move? Must businesses be stagnant? So these are the things. A good example is if you look at animal health, which is also can go side by side as bundling of services with fodder, is if hypothetically someone has a truck that is carrying everything and has even a trailer that can do all the caricides and treatment of skin and everything, and they are on the move, the wheels are on the move, they can reach to the pastoralists, they can service them there and do things there. Why not? So that is one. Things are also changing behaviorally, as Sarah has alluded to this. 2 weeks ago, I came from Somaliland and I visited one of the entrepreneurs there in a town called Borama. He has a split herd system where he has 59 lactating camels close to Borama city, where he's feeding extensively. And there he grows his own fodder. He puts some, constraints there, and he feeds the 59. Once they are out of milking cycle, he takes them to the main herd. He has another 150 herd somewhere, a place called Hout. So he transfers this and bring the other lactating group and switch the whole cycle. So this is something also practically that is happening in many parts across the region that are trying, things are changing. I believe my view is that things will slightly change. Consumption of milk around those towns of Garissa, Marsabit, will change. So behaviors will start to change, and businesses also need to adapt to that. Entrepreneurs need to adapt to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdikarim. I think very good responses. We have a lot of other questions coming in, but we have about 2 minutes to close this Q&A session. I really wanted to not really lock out anyone. Please continue writing your questions. We will try to get responses from the panelists through the chat. But just one more that I think is really standing out in the questions that are popping in. I don't know if I should choose, but I really wanted to hear about one that Hosea has asked about. Whose idea is it to do fodder production? Is it the pastoralist? Are we the NGOs pushing? I think this was part of a study, and I think the study was talking about NGOs and the project-based or project-driven approaches. I think this takes us back to Bolton, where we were asking, whose idea is it to really do this fodder production? How best can demand be led by private sector? Can pastoralists, and rangeland users? I think it speaks largely to that. Bolton, maybe you want to chip into that for the next 1 minute before we start our wrap-up.
Sure, Stivers, and thank you, Jose. That indeed is a good question. Well, as it stands at the moment, fodder production by the pastoralist is largely driven by the fact that pastoralists use it as a coping strategy. And if you look at it keenly, the development organization and NGOs are actually driving this agenda, to a point where pellets, for example, are being distributed as a relief. And that also creates this mindset where fodder should not be sold, It should be free for everyone, a common good. And that's a huge problem. And it requires a shift in how we approach it from our market systems, development, stimulating the demand as well, but also integrating it with the upcoming livestock production systems, the semi-intensive and intensive. Of course, land tenure at some point will change. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'll give each of you some time to give a recap or a wrap-up statement, but I think you can be reading through some of the questions that are in here to really see which one you can speak to during your 1 minute or so of wrap-up. I think there are questions directed to Sarah, to Abdikarim, that you can actually use in also your wrap-up session. But as we continue with this webinar and come to the close, the last 15 minutes, we really also wanted to talk about some of the key things that are coming out. I think the speakers here have really raised issues or very strong points around fodder production, the mentality, the challenges, but also the solutions, especially around the financing. I also think we have a poll. The question that we had asked, Ziana, is that up? We want to see what people are saying from the poll before we give each of the presenters some time to give a parting shot. Thank you. So what do you think is the biggest barrier to sustainable fodder production in the ASALs? We are seeing 43% of you are saying it's poor access to market and infrastructure. I think it speaks to what we were speaking about just a few minutes ago about policy and infrastructure and systems. 20% are saying that over-reliance on donor support, which I think also speaks to what the study is talking about. 10%, which is the third highest, is talking about, actually we have two 10%, limited private sector investment, but also low adoption of climate-smart practices. We have 5% each talking about inadequate inclusion of women and youth, and others were also sharing on the chat some of the challenges. So this was a multiple choice question, I guess, and we see 43% of you talking about poor access to market and infrastructure, markets, and infrastructure, roads, infrastructure, which can be many other things, not just roads, also coming up as a big barrier to fodder production in the arid lands. Thank you for that. I want to give each of the participants a minute or so to give some of their a parting shot. Also, you can use this minute to also answer one question, but please keep it brief. But also you can reflect on the poll and the responses that you've seen. I think we start with Abdikarim. You have a minute or so to just give your closing remarks.
Thank you, Stivers. Looking at the comments from colleagues, very important comments coming out. I just want to say, first of all, responding to some of those things, healthy rangelands are the primary important, I think, factor. Also, just before even we talk about fodder production supplements the rangeland resources, and therefore I think that's very important. Someone was asking about gender disparities. I think from the assessment, a number of things came out, but of importance: access to land, finances, mechanization, and youth involvement in the third half of the value chain are the key things that stand out when it comes to gender disparities. My parting shot, I think I would say, is for the future of fodder. I think it's not about the number of projects. It's not about how many NGOs and how many of us are engaged in fodder production in these counties. It's about what Sarah said, for example, smart partnerships, but also it's about innovative business models that are led by the entrepreneurs who know where the demand is and why they are producing, to respond to what also Hosea was saying. This can only be known by people who know there's a demand here, they need this, and we can produce for their demand, and that is very important. We come in as enablers largely to reduce risks, to provide technical support and assistance in terms of BDS. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdikarim. Sarah, a parting shot from you?
Thank you. Before I give my parting shot, let me quickly address a question that was on the chat about some of the products that we give and the ones that have been successful. We do give input loans where the fodder farmers are given to buy the seed and to be able to establish. We also have working capital. Working capital is where we give them money, and then this money they can be able to do weeding, harvesting. Then we also have asset financing. And under asset financing, we are looking at giving them money or credit facility to be able to buy the asset, be it a tractor, be it a plow, be it putting up storage. And finally, we also do agribusiness loans. And I think for me, I would say agribusiness loans have been the most successful. for the very reason that most of the biggest barrier that the poll pick was lack of market. When you give people this facility for agribusiness, then we give them money to be able to create a market, say like they're processing, meal, or they're just collecting and selling. So that one has become very successful. My parting shot would be, let's make the livestock sector in the ASAL regions work. And how we are going to do this, we already know the challenges. Let's not work in silos, but let's work together so that we are able to succeed. And as we're working together, let's be very clear on the exit strategy. I think we should avoid giving the people in this area fish, but instead we should be able to show them how to fish. Thank you. Together we can.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that very interesting parting shot that we should work together, partnerships. For those who came late, Sarah here is talking about products. She works as a senior planning officer for the Agriculture Finance Corporation. Bolton, your parting shot?
Thank you, Stivers. Well, mine is very simple. If we have to realize full commercialization of the fodder enterprises, I think it's important for us to work backwards. So integrating livestock production systems with fodder production systems for us to see that the holistic flow of goods from one value chain to another. As it stands, the two value chains are seen as separate, which is a huge problem. And then finally, this is a statement that I leave to the audience to contemplate, and I usually like it, is that all flesh is grass. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolton. I'm not sure if you've confused us more. Grass is fodder, all flesh. I can't even repeat that. Thank you so much. I think we have come to the end of this webinar and really interesting conversations coming from this. More so, I think I really want to thank all the participants, especially those who have been asking questions. There's so many questions flowing in the chat box. You can see that, but thank you, June, for helping me remember that. All flesh is grass. But yeah, thank you, Abdullahi, Ahmed, and everyone else who has asked questions. I think there's so many that we couldn't ask. We couldn't go through. Jack and the rest who have asked questions. Thank you so much, and we will try to address them. But the participants, I think, like Abdikarim is trying to really give responses here. We have the participants' contacts if you want to have follow-on questions that will be put on the screen now to basically show their contacts so that if you need to have a follow-up conversation with them, their contacts are here, their email addresses are here. Please feel free to reach out to them. That's the three of them. But also, if you have anything that you want to reach out to MW about, my email address is there, but more so our CEO's email is there. But also Audrey, who is here, who is our Global Knowledge Management and Learning Officer, who's really critical or really has been supporting this webinar series behind the scenes. And thank you for all the support, Audrey and the team that you've been giving us behind on the back end. Thank you to Ziana and the backend team who have been working tirelessly to make this successful. I am not sure if there's any other burning question that is popping up. I'll just check one last time on the chat. Okay. Oh, thank you, Abdikarim, for writing your email address there. And yeah, if anything, you have any question for any of the three panelists, including MWA, please feel free to ask or to write to us. We are 6 minutes early. Unless there is any other burning question, I would want us to end here. Just checking if there's any raised hand, any comment that is burning. Nothing. Thank you so much. Do enjoy the rest of your day, your evening, your afternoon, and we at Millennium Water Alliance really look forward to the next to having you in the next webinar that we will be hosting. Please look out for check our websites, check our LinkedIn pages for some of this webinar series that we do host at Millennium Water Alliance. Thank you, and I think we should end here. And yeah, have a good evening, day, and afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.